I'm Marcus Dale, 31, and I own the most successful fusion restaurant in downtown Portland. 5 years ago, my parents threw me out of their house with nothing but a suitcase and their words, still burning in my ears, "No son of ours will disgrace this family." They cut me off completely financially, emotionally, everything. What they didn't know was that their rejection would fuel something far more powerful than their disappointment ever could. Yesterday, I walked into Chen's Garden, the Little Chinese, a restaurant where I'd spent countless childhood hours helping my grandmother. Same place my parents always said would be mine someday. Same place they used as leverage to try to control who I loved. The for sale sign had been there for months. The asking price was exactly what I had sitting in my business account. But purchasing their beloved family legacy was just the beginning of what I'd planned. Subscribe if you've ever turned pain into power. This story is for you. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing inventory reports at Harmony, my restaurant. Sarah Mitchell from Pacific Northwest Realty had a warm but professional voice that somehow made the conversation feel both casual and momentous. "Mr. Chen, I understand you've been inquiring about commercial properties in the Southeast Division area. I have a listing that just came on the market that might interest you." My pen stopped moving across the spreadsheet. What kind of property? A small restaurant space, about 2,800 square feet. The business has been family-owned for 32 years, but the owners are looking to retire. Chen's Garden, perhaps, you know it? The pen slipped from my fingers, clattering against my desk. Chen's Garden. It's the place where I'd spent countless afternoons after school, standing on a wooden crate beside my grandmother as she taught me to fold dumplings. Where I'd learned that ginger should be sliced paper-thin, and that love could be measured in the patience it took to make perfect wonton soup. Double quotes, "Mr. Chen, are you still there?" "Yes." "Sorry. What's the asking price?" "They're asking for $185,000 for the business, equipment, and remaining lease. The location has excellent foot traffic, and the kitchen is fully equipped. Though I should mention, the current owners seem quite motivated to sell quickly." Motivated. Was real estate speak for desperate. I pulled up my business banking app. It's confirming what I already knew. My account showed $523,847.16. More than enough. "I'd like to see the listing details." "Wonderful. I'll email them right over. Are you interested in scheduling a viewing?" I stared out my office window at the lunch crowd gathering outside Harmony. Just 5 years ago, I'd been washing dishes in a dive bar, sending every spare dollar to culinary school. Now I owned the most successful fusion restaurant in Portland. With a James Beard nomination and a waiting list that stretched 2 weeks out, my parents didn't know any of this. They'd probably assumed I was struggling, maybe living paycheck to paycheck in some studio apartment. They certainly never imagined their disowned son would have $500,000 sitting in his business account. "Mr. Chen, yes, schedule the viewing. When's the earliest you can arrange it?" "How about Thursday at 2 p.m.? Perfect. I was already calculating. Thursday would give me 2 days to prepare emotionally for walking back into the place that held so many memories, both beautiful and painful. After I hung up, I sat in the silence of my office. Grandmother's jade bracelet warm against my wrist where I'd worn it every day since her funeral that I wasn't allowed to attend. Chen's Garden had been my second home from the moment I could walk. While other kids spent afternoons at playgrounds or in front of televisions, I was perched on a wooden milk crate behind the counter, watching my grandmother Wai Ming work magic with nothing but her hands and ingredients that most people couldn't even pronounce. "Marcus," she'd say in her careful English mixed with Mandarin, "cooking is not just about feeding the body. It's about feeding the soul, the memories, the love between people." She'd guide my small hands as we folded wontons, her fingers weathered and wise, mine clumsy but eager. Each dumpling must be perfect, not because customers will know the difference, but because we know the difference. My parents, James and Linda Chen, had different ideas about perfection. They'd immigrated from Taiwan in their 20s, opening Chen's Garden with nothing but ambition and my grandmother's recipes. For them, the restaurant wasn't just a business, it was proof they belonged in America, proof they could build something lasting for their family. "This will all be yours someday," my father would tell me, gesturing around the modest dining room with its red vinyl booths and paper lanterns. "Dunn's Garden will stay in the family forever. It's what family means, carrying on the legacy." But even as a child, I sensed the weight of their expectations. Had to get perfect grades, excel in math competitions, play violin at church functions. I had to be the model son who would seamlessly take over the family business and marry a nice Chinese girl who would give them grandchildren to continue the Chen name. The restaurant itself reflected their careful adherence to tradition. The menu hadn't changed in 20 years. Sweet and sour pork, beef with broccoli, chicken fried rice, all the Americanized Chinese dishes that customers expected. My grandmother would sometimes cook more authentic dishes for the staff meal, but my parents insisted those wouldn't sell to their primarily white customer base. Americans want familiar food, my mother would say. We give them what they want. We make good money. We don't make waves. I loved those quiet moments with my grandmother when my parents were busy in the front. She'd tell me stories about her childhood in Taiwan, about recipes passed down through generations, about the importance of honoring both where you came from and where you were going. Her recipe book, handwritten in a mixture of Chinese characters and broken English, was her most treasured possession. Someday, Marcus, you will understand that food is about more than just tradition. She'd whisper while my parents counted receipts in the front room. It's about bringing people together, about creating something new while honoring something old. Even then, I felt the tension between my grandmother's gentle wisdom and my parents' rigid expectations. They saw the restaurant as a fortress against change, a way to preserve their version of Chinese culture in America. But I found myself drawn to the fusion experiments my grandmother would create during slow afternoons, adding unexpected spices, combining techniques, creating dishes that honored tradition while embracing innovation. By the time I was in high school, I already knew I wanted something different. Not just different food, but a different life. I watched my parents work 16-hour days, sacrificing everything for a business that barely supported our family. I watched them grow bitter when younger. More successful Asian restaurants opened nearby with modern decor and contemporary menus. But I also watched my grandmother's eyes light up whenever she cooked something new, something that bridged the gap between old and new, between who we were and who we could become. Her recipe book became my secret textbook, and her quiet rebellions became my inspiration. I just didn't know yet how much courage it would take to follow that inspiration. College was supposed to be my fresh start. Portland State University felt like a different world from the insular community where everyone knew the Chen family and our little restaurant. For the first time in my life, I could be just Marcus, not the restaurant kid, not the perfect Chinese son, just me. I threw myself into my studies with the same intensity my parents brought to the restaurant. Business major with a minor in culinary arts, maintaining a 3.8 GPA while working part-time at a campus coffee shop. The acceptance letter to PSU still lived in my desk drawer, creased from the number of times I'd unfolded it during my freshman year, reminding myself that I'd earned this opportunity through my own merit. It was during my sophomore year that I met David Rodriguez in an introduction to marketing class. He was everything I wasn't: confident, outgoing, comfortable in his own skin. That drew people in, where I dressed conservatively in button-downs and khakis. He wore vintage band t-shirts and had an infectious laugh that filled whatever room he entered. We started as study partners, then friends, then something more that I couldn't quite name at first. I'd never allowed myself to examine the feelings I'd pushed down for so many years. It's the way I'd notice other boys in high school. The discomfort I felt when my parents talked about my future wife and children. David was patient with my confusion, never pushing, always letting me set the pace. There's no timeline for figuring yourself out, he'd tell me during those long walks around campus where we talked about everything except what was happening between us. Some people know when they're 5 years old, others take longer, are perfectly normal. It's the first time he kissed me. We were in his dorm room studying for our marketing midterm. He leaned over to point out something in my textbook, and suddenly we were closer than we'd ever been. When his lips touched mine, everything I'd been fighting against for 20 years suddenly made perfect sense. "I think I'm gay," I whispered. Against his mouth, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. "I think you might be," he smiled back. "And I think that's exactly who you're supposed to be." The next 6 months were the happiest of my life. David introduced me to a community I never knew existed. LGBTQ+ student groups, pride events, friends who understood what it meant to come out later in life. For the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere without having to perform or pretend. But as graduation approached, the weight of family expectations pressed down harder. My parents had started talking about me taking a more active role in Chen's garden, about meeting suitable young women from families they knew, about, about grandchildren and carrying on the family name. You have to tell them eventually, David said. One evening, as we walked through Pioneer Courthouse Square, they love you, Marcus. They'll come around. Wanted to believe him. Despite everything, despite the pressure and expectations, I loved my parents. I wanted them to love all of me, not just the version I'd been performing for them my entire life. The graduation ceremony was 2 weeks away when I finally found the courage to drive home and tell them the truth. I chose a Sunday evening when the restaurant was closed and we were all together in the living room above Chen's garden. My parents were watching the Chinese news while my grandmother dozed in her recliner, and everything felt so normal that I almost lost my nerve. Mom, Dad, I need to tell you something important. My father muted the television and my mother looked up from her knitting. Even my grandmother opened her eyes, sensing the gravity in my voice. I'm gay. The words came out quieter than I'd intended, but they hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. I have a boyfriend. His name is David, and I love him. The silence that followed felt endless. My mother's knitting needles had stopped clicking. My father's face had gone completely blank. Only my grandmother reached across the space between us, her weathered hand finding mine. You're confused, my mother finally said, her voice strained. This is just a phase. College puts ideas in young people's heads. It's not a phase, Mom. This is who I am. I've known for years, but I was afraid to tell you. My father stood up so abruptly that his chair scraped against the floor. No. His voice was sharp, final. No son of mine will bring this shame on our family. Dad, please, do you know what people will say? My mother's voice was rising, panic bleeding through. About us, about the restaurant, about our family name. We have worked so hard to build respect in this community. I'm still your son, I said, my voice breaking. I'm still the same person who helped you in the restaurant, who got good grades, who know. My father's voice cut through everything. Marcus Chen would never disgrace his family like this. Marcus Chen would think about his parents, about his duty, about carrying on our name. He looked at me like I was a stranger. You are not my son. Grandmother's grip on my hand tightened, but she said nothing. The weight of cultural expectations and family honor pressed down on all of us. Get out, my mother whispered, tears streaming down her face. Just get out. I went upstairs to pack, my hands shaking as I threw clothes into the old suitcase I'd used for college. 22 years of life reduced to one bag of belongings. I could hear my parents arguing downstairs, my mother sobbing, my father's voice growing more rigid with each word. My grandmother appeared in my doorway as I zipped the suitcase shut. Without speaking, she pressed something into my palm, her jade bracelet, warm from her wrist. Nai loves you, she whispered in Mandarin. Using the name I'd called her since childhood, always. When I walked out of Chen's garden that night, I didn't just leave my family home. I left everything I'd ever known about belonging, about love, about who I was supposed to be. The suitcase in my hand contained my entire world now, and it felt impossibly light. David's studio apartment in Northwest Portland became my sanctuary and my prison. For the first week, I barely left his futon, cycling between rage and grief while he brought me cup noodles and tissues. The financial reality hit me hardest. My parents had been paying my tuition, my car insurance, even my cell phone bill. Suddenly, I had nothing but the $847 in my checking account, and whatever shifts I could pick up at the campus coffee shop. You can stay here as long as you need, David said, sitting beside me on the cramped futon that served as both couch and bed. My parents said, you're welcome to come home with me to Sacramento if you want a break from Portland. The kindness of strangers felt overwhelming when my own family had cut me off so completely. Welcomed me into their home during spring break like I was already part of the family. They asked about my studies, my dreams, my relationship with their son, treating my sexuality as just another aspect of who I was. It's not a source of shame or confusion, but I couldn't run away to California. I had 2 weeks left of college, finals, to take a degree to earn, as if I was going to prove that I could survive without my family's support. I had to start now. I picked up extra shifts at the coffee shop, working opening shifts at 5 a.m., before classes and closing shifts until 11 p.m. My paycheck stub from that first week showed $127.50 after taxes. Not even enough to cover my share of David's rent. I applied for every job I could find: retail, food service, tutoring, even participating in psychology studies that paid $20 for an hour of my time. The job that changed everything was at Pazzo Ristorante, an upscale Italian place in the Pearl District. I lied on my application, claiming more kitchen experience than I actually had. But my years of watching my grandmother cook gave me an intuitive understanding of timing, seasoning, and technique that impressed the head chef. During my trail shift, "You've got good hands," Chef Martinez told me after watching me prep vegetables for 2 hours. "Most people your age think they know everything. You listen, you watch, you learn. That's rare." I started as a prep cook, making $12 an hour, and working nights while finishing my degree. The kitchen was brutal hot, fast-paced, filled with ego and adrenaline. But it was also where I discovered my true calling. Unlike the rigid traditions of Chen's garden, Pazzo encouraged creativity within structure. I learned to make perfect pasta, to balance flavors and sauces, to present dishes that were as beautiful as they were delicious. My first real paycheck was $327.48 for 2 weeks of work. I stared at the direct deposit notification on my phone, feeling a pride I'd never experienced before. This money was minered through my own effort, not dependent on family approval or cultural expectations. Graduation day arrived with no fanfare. David's parents drove up from Sacramento to watch me walk across the stage, cheering louder than any family member ever had. My grandmother sent a card through a family friend with a $20 bill tucked inside and a note written in her careful English. "Proud of you always." My parents didn't acknowledge the day at all. That night, David and I sat on the fire. Escape outside his apartment, sharing a bottle of cheap champagne and looking out at the lights of downtown Portland. My business degree was just a piece of paper, but it represented something more important: proof that I could succeed without the safety net I'd always assumed would be there. "What now?" David asked, his hand finding mine in the darkness. "I figure out how to build a life that's entirely my own," I said, twisting my grandmother's jade bracelet around my wrist. "And maybe someday I'll show my parents exactly what they gave up when they decided I wasn't worth their love." The city sparkled below us. It's full of possibilities I was finally free to explore. Working at Pazzo opened my eyes to what professional cooking could be. Every night, I watched Chef Martinez create dishes that were technically perfect and artistically stunning. The kitchen operated like a symphony, each station playing its part in creating experiences that went far beyond just feeding people. "You should go to culinary school," Chef Martinez told me one evening after I'd successfully covered the sauce station during a particularly busy dinner rush. "You've got natural instincts, but formal training would give you the foundation too. Really excel." The idea had been growing in my mind for months. The Western Culinary Institute in downtown Portland had a reputation for excellence, but the tuition was $35,000 for the full program. With my current income, it might as well have been $35 million. I started researching scholarships, financial aid, anything that might make culinary school possible. Most required family financial information that I no longer had access to, but one found a few merit-based programs that looked promising. The application process was grueling essays about my culinary background, letters of recommendation, a practical cooking exam that left me exhausted and exhilarated. To save money, I moved into a studio apartment in Southeast Portland that was barely larger than a closet. David and I were still together, but the strain of my financial situation was affecting our relationship. He was starting his career in marketing while I was working nights and weekends, dreaming of a future that felt impossibly expensive. The acceptance letter arrived on a Tuesday in March, along with news that made my hands shake. I'd been awarded a partial scholarship covering 60% of tuition. The remaining $14,000 would have to come from loans and my own savings. I worked double shifts for months, picking up catering gigs on weekends and taking every available hour at Pazzo. My bank account slowly grew. $2,000, then $5,000, then $8,000. I ate ramen noodles and NT peanut butter sandwiches, wore clothes until they fell apart, and walked everywhere to save on bus fare. The day I enrolled at Western Culinary Institute, I had exactly $12,847 in savings and a student loan for the remainder. My orientation packet felt like a treasure, mapped to the future I wanted to build. On my first day, surrounded by classmates who mostly came from culinary families or restaurant backgrounds, I felt the familiar outsider sensation. But when we started our knife skills assessment, my hands moved with the confidence my grandmother had given me years ago in Chen's garden. "Excellent technique," my instructor noted. watching me julienne vegetables with precision. "Where did you train?" "My grandmother's kitchen," I said, and for the first time in months, it felt like enough. Culinary school was 18 months of intensive training that rebuilt everything I thought I knew about cooking. While my classmates focused on traditional French techniques or modern molecular gastronomy, I found myself drawn to something different: fusion cuisine that honored my Chinese heritage while embracing the innovation I'd always craved. My final project was a 7-course tasting menu that told the story of Asian American identity through food. Kung Pao chicken reimagined as a delicate consomme with Sichuan peppercorn oil. Traditional Xiaolong Bao soup dumplings filled with Oregon truffle and local mushroom duxels. 5-spice duck breast with huckleberry gastrique and forbidden rice. Risotto. This is exceptional work, Chef Instructor Williams told me after the final presentation. "You're not just cooking, you're creating a narrative. Have you thought about what's next?" I'd been thinking about it constantly. During my externship at Le Pigeon, one of Portland's most innovative restaurants, I'd watched owner Gabriel Rucker build a culinary empire from a single ambitious concept. The business side of restaurants fascinated me almost as much as the cooking itself. I spent months developing my business plan, working late into the night at my tiny kitchen table, covered with market research, financial projections, and menu concepts. The restaurant I envisioned would be called Harmony, a place where Eastern and Western culinary traditions could coexist and create something entirely new. The concept was personal. After years of feeling torn between my Chinese heritage and my American identity, between my family's expectations and my own dreams, I wanted to create a space where those divisions didn't exist, where someone like me could celebrate all parts of who they were without apology. My business plan was projected $1.2 million in startup costs for a 2,500 square foot restaurant in Southeast Portland. The numbers were daunting, but I'd learned too. Be realistic about both challenges and opportunities. Portland's food scene was competitive, but welcoming to innovation. The city's demographics were perfect for Asian fusion cuisine. There was a gap in the market for upscale Asian American dining. Finding investors proved more challenging than I'd anticipated. Traditional lenders wanted to see restaurant management experience I didn't have. Family money wasn't an option, but Portland's food community was tight-knit, and word of my concept began to spread. My breakthrough came through an unexpected connection. Maria Santos, a local food writer who'd reviewed several restaurants where I'd worked, mentioned my business plan to her husband, a successful tech entrepreneur looking to diversify his investment portfolio. "I've seen your food," Tom Santos told me during our first meeting at a coffee shop in the Pearl District. "Maria brought home leftovers from that pop-up dinner you did last month. What you're proposing isn't just a restaurant, it's cultural bridge building through cuisine." After 3 months of meetings, financial reviews, and revised projections, Tom agreed to provide $800,000 in initial funding in exchange for a 35% stake in the restaurant. Combined with my savings and a small business loan, I finally had enough capital to make Harmony a reality. The day I signed the partnership agreement, I called David to share the news. "I'm actually going to do this," I told him, still hardly believing it myself. "I never doubted you for a second," he said, and I could hear the pride in his voice. Harmony opened on a rainy Tuesday in October, 3 years after I'd been kicked out of my family home. The soft opening was for friends and industry professionals, 42 covers that would determine whether my dream was viable or just an expensive mistake. I stood in the pass, watching plates leave the kitchen that represented years of planning, saving, and hoping. The Don Don noodles with house-made chili oil and Oregon hazelnuts, the tea-smoked duck breast with black garlic and roasted delicata squash, the dessert that had become my signature black sesame creme broly with candied ginger and fortune cookie twilled. The first review appeared in Willamette Week, 3 weeks after opening. "Harmony represents the future of Portland dining," food critic Jessica Kim wrote. "Chef Marcus Chen has created something rare, a restaurant that honors tradition while fearlessly embracing innovation. This is Asian American cuisine at its most sophisticated and personal." The review changed everything. Reservations filled up weeks in advance. Food and Wine magazine included Harmony in their Best New Restaurants feature. The James Beard Foundation nominated me for Rising Chef of the Year in my first year of operation, but the moment that mattered most came 6 months after opening, when I received a phone call from an unknown number. "Is this Marcus Chen from Harmony Restaurant?" "Yes, this is Marcus. My name is Helen Zhang. I'm a friend of your grandmother's from the senior center. She wanted me to call you." My heart stopped. Is she okay? She's fine, dear. She wanted you to know that she's very proud of you. She's been following your success in the newspapers. She says to tell you that you've honored the family recipes while making them your own, just like she always hoped you would. I had to sit down, overwhelmed by the connection to the one family member who'd never stopped loving me. The success of Harmony exceeded every projection in my business plan. By the end of the first year, we were booked solid, generating $2.8 million in revenue. I was able to pay Tom back ahead of schedule and retain majority ownership of the restaurant. More importantly, I'd created exactly the kind of space I'd envisioned, where tradition and innovation coexisted, where stories were told through food, where people like me could feel completely at home. Food Network featured Harmony on Best Restaurants in America. I was invited to cook at the James Beard House in New York. My bank account showed numbers I'd never imagined possible 5 years earlier, when I was sleeping on David's futon and eating ramen noodles for every meal. The local food magazine's review summed up what Harmony meant to Portland's dining scene. Marcus Chen has created more than a restaurant. He's created a cultural institution that bridges communities and redefines what American cuisine can be. I kept every review, every accolade, every piece of recognition. Not because I needed validation, but because each one represented proof that I'd built something meaningful entirely on my own terms. The news reached me through Facebook, of all places. I was scrolling through my feed on a quiet Sunday morning when I saw a post from my cousin Jennifer, who I hadn't spoken to since my parents disowned me. "We'll miss you so much, Nai. Rest in peace." The photo showed my grandmother's peaceful face, surrounded by flowers and family members I barely recognized anymore. The comments were filled with memories, condolences, and details about funeral arrangements that I would never be welcome to attend. I sat in my empty restaurant, staring at the screen until the words blurred together. She was gone, and I hadn't even known she was sick. It's the woman who taught me to cook, who'd shown me unconditional love, who'd slipped me her jade bracelet in those final moments before I left home. She'd died without me being able to say goodbye. I called the funeral home, hoping to at least find out when the service would be held. Maybe I could stand in the back, pay my respects from a distance. "I'm sorry," the funeral director said gently. "The family has requested a private service for immediate family only. Are you on the list?" "No," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not on the list." The funeral was held on a Tuesday afternoon while I was at the restaurant, trying to lose myself in prep work. My hands moved automatically, dicing onions and measuring spices, but my mind was with my grandmother. I wondered if she'd been in pain, if she'd asked for me. She knew how much her love had sustained me through the hardest years of my life. David found me in the walk-in cooler that evening, crying among the vegetables and proteins. "I'm so sorry," he said, holding me while I grieved not just my grandmother's death, but the family connection I'd lost long before she passed away. 3 days later, Helen Jung called again. "Marcus, I have something for you. Your grandmother asked me to give it to you after she passed." We met at a coffee shop in Southeast Portland, and Helen, a small woman in her 70s with kind eyes, handed me a package wrapped in red silk. "She wanted you to have this. She said you were the only one who would understand what it meant." It was my grandmother's recipe book, the worn notebook, with pages stained by decades of cooking, filled with her careful handwriting in a mixture of Chinese characters and English. But there was something else. A letter, written in her precise script. "My dear Marcus," it began. "If you are reading this, I am gone, but my love for you continues. I have watched your success from afar, and I am so proud of the man you have become. You have honored our family recipes while making them your own, just as I always hoped you would. Do not grieve for me. I lived long enough to see you create something beautiful in this world. The recipes in this book are yours now. Use them to keep our family's love alive, even when our family cannot show love the way it should. You are my greatest pride." I held the letter and the recipe book, feeling the weight of her love and the devastating loss all at once. This was my inheritance, not property or money, but the knowledge and love that had shaped who I'd become that night. I made her wonton soup in my restaurant kitchen, following her recipe exactly. With each dumpling I folded, I felt her presence. Beside me, guiding my hands the way she had when I was small, she was gone. But the love she'd given me would live on in every dish I created, every meal I shared, every moment I chose compassion over bitterness, Curiosity about my parents' situation had been growing since my grandmother's funeral. Helen Zhang's occasional updates painted a picture of a family struggling with more than just grief. Chen's Garden, once a neighborhood staple, was losing customers to newer Asian restaurants with modern menus and updated decor. Your parents are proud people, Helen told me during one of our monthly coffee meetings. They won't ask for help even when they need it. I started driving by Chen's Garden occasionally, parking across the street during different times of day to observe the foot traffic. What I saw was troubling. The lunch crowd that used to fill every table had dwindled to a handful of elderly regulars. The dinner service looked even worse some nights. I counted fewer than 10 customers during what should have been peak hours. The restaurant itself showed signs of neglect. The red awning was faded and torn in places. The window displays looked tired, with the same dusty fake food models that had been there since I was a teenager. Even from the street, I could see that several light fixtures weren't working, creating dark corners in what was already a poorly lit dining room. My investigation became more deliberate. I used my industry connections to gather information about Chen's Garden suppliers, learning that they'd switched to cheaper food distributors and were often late on payments. The health department inspection report, publicly available online, showed multiple violations that had been corrected only after warnings. The most revealing information came through Portland's business licensing database. Chen's Garden had taken out multiple small business loans over the past 2 years, and there were liens filed against the property for unpaid taxes. They were drowning financially, using credit to stay afloat, while their customer base continued to shrink. I found myself feeling conflicted about their struggles. Part of me, a hurt child who'd been rejected and abandoned, felt a dark satisfaction that their rigid adherence to tradition was finally costing them. They'd refused to evolve, refused to embrace change, and now they were paying the price. But another part of me, the part that remembered Sunday dinners together and helping my father count receipts, felt genuine sadness. Chen's Garden wasn't just a failing business. It was the destruction of everything my parents had worked for since immigrating to America. The final piece of information came from a former employee who now worked at Harmony. Chen's Garden was behind on rent and facing eviction. The landlord had been patient because of my parents' long tenancy, but patience had limits. They're probably going to have to sell, Maria, my sous chef mentioned casually. Shame, really. That place has so much history. History. Yes, it did. And suddenly, I knew exactly what I wanted to do about it. I hired Rebecca Martinez, private investigator who specialized in financial background checks for business acquisitions. I need to know everything about Chen's Garden restaurant. Told her during our initial meeting, financial records, debts, assets, the works. Rebecca was thorough and discreet. Within 2 weeks, she'd assembled a comprehensive report that painted a devastating picture of my parents' financial situation. The restaurant was $127,000 in debt, with outstanding loans from 3 different banks. They'd mortgaged the building. They'd owned outright for 30 years, using the equity to cover operating expenses and loan payments. They're in a classic death spiral, Rebecca explained, spreading documents across her conference table. Revenue declining, costs increasing. Borrowing money to pay existing debts. Based on these numbers, they have maybe 6 months before bankruptcy becomes inevitable. The details were even more troubling. My parents had let their business insurance lapse to save money, leaving them vulnerable to catastrophic losses. They'd stopped paying into their retirement accounts years ago. The equipment in the kitchen was failing, but they couldn't afford repairs or replacements. Most heartbreaking was evidence of their desperate attempts to save the business. They'd tried running Groupon promotions that brought in customers, but destroyed their profit margins. It extended their hours, staying open later and opening earlier, which increased their labor costs without significantly increasing revenue. There's something else, Rebecca said, sliding another document across the table. They've been using your grandmother's memory as a marketing tool. The document was a recent newspaper advertisement showing a photo of my grandmother with the headline, "Traditional Recipes Passed Down Through Generations." The ad emphasized the restaurant's authentic family heritage and time-honored cooking. Methods passed down from beloved matriarch Weiming Chen. It was manipulative and dishonest. My grandmother had died 18 months ago, but they were still using her image to attract customers who wanted an authentic experience. What made it worse was knowing that my grandmother had always encouraged innovation and adaptation, the very things my parents had refused to embrace. I need you to keep digging, I told Rebecca. I want to know exactly how they talk about their family situation. Do they mention having a son? The answer came back a week later, and it was what I'd expected but hoped wouldn't be true. My parents had systematically erased me from their family narrative. When customers asked about succession planning or family involvement in the business, they claimed to have no children. When community members inquired about the next generation carrying on the restaurant, they simply said they were the last of the family line. I existed in their financial records as a dependent until 2018, then disappeared completely. Acuna, who'd met them in the past 5 years, James and Linda Chen were a childless couple running a failing restaurant with no heir to carry on their legacy. The erasure was complete and intentional. They'd made me disappear so thoroughly that even their own narrative of victimhood, hardworking immigrant parents struggling to preserve their family business, didn't acknowledge my existence. Rebecca's final report included a property valuation. In business assessment, Chen's Garden, including the building, equipment, and remaining lease obligations, was worth approximately $485,000 in a quick sale. That was significantly less than what my parents owed, but enough to cover their debts. And leave them with a small amount to start over. Are you planning to make an offer? Rebecca asked. I stared at the financial records spread across the table, years of poor decisions, declining revenue, and increasing desperation documented in spreadsheets and loan applications. This was the family business I'd been supposed to inherit, the legacy I'd been kicked out of, the reason my parents had valued tradition over their own son. Yes, I said finally, but not directly. I want them to know exactly who's buying their life's work, but only after the deal is done. Can you recommend a lawyer who handles anonymous transactions? Rebecca smiled. Nice. Exactly the right person. For this job, attorney Sarah Kim specialized in complex business transactions, particularly those involving family dynamics and confidentiality requirements. Her office in downtown Portland was elegant but understated, much like her approach to what she termed sensitive acquisitions. I understand you want to purchase a property anonymously, she said, reviewing the preliminary documents Rebecca had prepared. This is more common than you might think, especially in family business situations. There are several legal structures we can use to protect your identity until you choose to reveal it. We settled on creating a limited liability company called Pacific Restaurant Holdings, with Sarah's law firm listed as the registered agent. On paper, I would be completely invisible until the purchase was completed, and I chose to step forward. The sellers will know they're dealing with a legitimate buyer with sufficient funds, Sarah explained. But they won't know the buyer's identity until after closing, if at all. You maintain complete control over when and how you reveal yourself. The strategy felt both calculated and necessary. I wasn't just buying a restaurant, I was orchestrating a reckoning that had been building for 5 years. My parents had erased me from their family story, but I was about to become the most important character in their business narrative. I spent a week wrestling with the moral implications of what I was planning. Was this justice or revenge? Was I giving my parents an opportunity to start over, or was I deliberately humiliating them? The questions kept me awake at night, staring at the ceiling of my apartment while David slept beside me. You don't have to do this, David said one morning over coffee. After I'd spent another sleepless night analyzing my motivations, you've already proven everything you need to prove. You're successful, you're happy, you've built a life that's entirely your own. But they don't know that, I said. They erased me so completely that they probably think I'm struggling somewhere, maybe even dead. They've never had to face the consequences of their choice. David reached across the table and took my hand. And you think buying their restaurant will force them to face those consequences? I think it will show them exactly what they gave up when they decided I wasn't worth their love. The decision crystallized during a conversation with Helen Zhang. She'd called to tell me that my parents were considering selling Chen's Garden, though they were heartbroken about letting go of their life's work. They keep saying they failed, Helen said sadly, that they couldn't preserve what they built, that they're letting down your grandmother's memory. It's very difficult to watch. After I hung up, I sat in my office at Harmony, looking at the bank statement that showed more money than my parents had ever dreamed of making. I'd built something beautiful and successful, something that honored my heritage while embracing innovation. Everything they'd refused to let Chen's Garden become. The purchase wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. For 5 years, my parents had lived with their version of reality. We're disowning their gay son, was a righteous choice that preserved family honor. They'd never had to confront what they'd actually lost. I called Sarah Kim and gave her the go-ahead. "Draft the offer," I said. "Full asking price, cash purchase, 30-day closing." And Sarah, "When it's time for the reveal, I want to be the one to tell them." The cashier's check for $485,000 felt lighter than it should have when I picked it up from the bank. This wasn't just money, it was 5 years of working 18-hour days. 5 years of building something from nothing. 5 years of proving that I could succeed without their approval or support. As I handed the check to Sarah, I thought about my grandmother's recipe book, sitting on my kitchen counter at home. She'd wanted me to honor family traditions while making them my own. I was about to do exactly that. The offer went through Pacific Restaurant Holdings on a Thursday morning. Sarah called me an hour after submitting the paperwork to let me know my parents' attorney had accepted immediately. No negotiation, no counteroffers, just desperate relief at finding a buyer who could close quickly with cash. "They seem very motivated," Sarah noted with professional understatement. "Closing is scheduled for 3 weeks from today." I spent those 3 weeks in a strange state of anticipation mixed with dread. Part of me wanted to call the whole thing off, to let someone else buy Chen's garden and allow my parents to disappear into whatever retirement they could afford. But a larger part of me knew this confrontation had been inevitable from the moment they'd chosen their prejudices over their son. The day of closing arrived, gray and drizzly. Typical October weather in Portland. I sat in Sarah's conference room while she handled the final paperwork, signing documents that transferred ownership of my childhood to Pacific Restaurant Holdings and, by extension, to me. "It's done," Sarah said, sliding the property deed across the table. "You now own Chun's Garden Restaurant and the building it occupies. The sellers have been given 48 hours to remove personal belongings, and then the property is yours." I stared at the deed, my name nowhere to be found on the legal documents, but my fingerprints on every dollar that had purchased this piece of my past. The strange thing was how anticlimactic it felt. I'd expected some surge of triumph or vindication, but instead, I just felt empty. That evening, I drove to Chun's Garden for the first time as its owner. The building looked smaller than it had in my memories, more worn down than I'd noticed during my surveillance visits. The red awning was torn in 3 places, and the front window had a crack that someone had tried to repair with clear tape. I used the keys Sarah had given me to enter through the front door. The dining room was exactly as I remembered it from childhood. The same red vinyl booths, same paper lanterns, even the same artificial flowers on each table, but everything looked tired, faded, like a photograph left too long in the sun. The kitchen told the real story of my parents' struggles. Equipment that should have been replaced years ago, held together with jury-rigged repairs. The walk-in cooler was running but making ominous grinding noises. The prep tables were scarred from decades of use, and the floor tiles were chipped and stained beyond any possibility of cleaning. In the small office behind the kitchen, I found traces of my family's life scattered among business documents and supplier invoices. A photo of my grandmother from the newspaper advertisement was taped to the computer monitor. A calendar from 2019 still hung on the wall, as if time had stopped the year after I was disowned. But what struck me most was what wasn't there. No family photos that included me, no evidence that James and Linda Chen had ever had a son. They'd erased me so completely from this space that even being physically present felt like trespassing. I sat in my father's old desk chair, looking around the office where I'd done homework as a child, and realized that owning this place wouldn't bring me closure. The real confrontation was still ahead. I closed Chen's Garden the day after taking possession, posting a simple sign that read, "Closed for renovations, reopening soon." The neighborhood probably assumed new owners were updating the tired restaurant, which wasn't entirely wrong. They just didn't know the new owner was the son who'd been erased from family history. The renovation plans I'd drawn up were extensive but respectful. I wanted to transform Chen's Garden into something that honored its history while embracing the innovation my grandmother had always encouraged. The dining room would be completely redesigned with modern fixtures and an open kitchen concept. The menu would feature elevated Chinese-American fusion cuisine that bridged traditional and contemporary flavors. Working with the same contractor who'd helped build Harmony, I began the transformation. The old red vinyl booths were replaced with custom banquettes in deep green leather. The paper lanterns gave way to elegant pendant lighting that created warmth without kitsch. The artificial flowers were replaced with living plants and herbs that would eventually be used in the kitchen. The kitchen renovation was the most extensive. I installed professional-grade equipment that would allow for the kind of precise cooking Chen's garden had never been capable of. Induction burners, convection ovens, proper ventilation system, everything needed to create restaurant-quality food at the level I'd trained for. But I also preserved elements that mattered. My grandmother's old wok, which I found hanging in the back storage room, was restored and given a place of honor in the new kitchen. Her wooden cutting board, worn smooth by decades of use, became part of the prep station. The space needed to remember where it came from while embracing where it was going. During the renovation, I found traces of my childhood that my parents had overlooked. Behind the water heater, I discovered a drawing I'd made in third grade showing our family standing in front of Chen's garden, all of us smiling and holding hands. In a box of old supplier catalogs, I found a photo of my grandmother teaching me to fold dumplings, my small hands guided by her patient fingers. These discoveries were simultaneously heartwarming and heartbreaking. They proved that my connection to this place was real, that my memories weren't fabricated or romanticized. But they also highlighted how deliberately my parents had worked to erase me from the restaurant's story. The most significant addition to the renovation was a small memorial wall near the entrance, dedicated to my grandmother's contributions to Chen's garden and the Portland food community. Her photo, not the exploitative newspaper image my parents had used, but a beautiful portrait from her 70th birthday, was surrounded by some of her original recipes translated into English and Chinese. In memory of Weiming Chen, the plaque read, who taught us that food is love made visible, and that tradition grows stronger when it embraces change. As the renovation neared completion, I began planning the menu for the new Chen's garden. It would feature dishes that told the story of Chinese-American cuisine evolution, traditional preparations alongside modern interpretations, familiar flavors. Presented in unexpected ways, the soup dumpling course would offer both my grandmother's classic pork and chive filling and my own innovation with duck confit and shiitake mushrooms. The noodle section would include traditional lo mein alongside dan dan noodles, with Oregon hazelnuts and locally sourced vegetables. Every dish would honor the past while embracing the future. Exactly what my parents had refused to let the original Chen's garden become. The renovation took 6 weeks and cost $180,000. But the result was stunning. Chen's garden looked like what it always could have been, a bridge between cultures, a celebration of heritage that wasn't afraid of innovation, a restaurant worthy of my grandmother's legacy and my own culinary vision. They came on a Wednesday afternoon, 3 days before the grand reopening. I was in the kitchen doing final prep when I heard the front door chime. Through the service window, I watched my parents enter what had been their restaurant for 32 years. They looked smaller than I remembered, older and more fragile. My father's hair had gone completely gray, and my mother moved with the careful steps of someone whose joints protested every movement. For a moment, seeing them in this space that held so many memories, I felt a stab of something that might have been love. "Excuse me," my father called out in accented English, addressing the dining room as if he expected someone to appear. "We are looking for the new owner." I took off my apron, checked my reflection in the stainless steel surface of the prep counter, and walked into the dining room. The moment they saw me, both of them froze as if they'd seen a ghost. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father's face went through a series of expressions: shock, confusion, and something that might have been fear. "Hello, Mom, Dad." Silence stretched between us like a chasm. My mother was the first to recover, though her voice shook when she spoke. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" "I work here," I said simply. "Actually, I own here." "Pacific Restaurant Holdings?" "That's my company." My father's face flushed red with what I recognized as anger, masking embarrassment. "This is impossible." The lawyer said exactly what I told them to say. I bought Chen's garden. All of it. The building, the equipment, the name, everything. My mother sank into the nearest chair, her legs apparently unable to support her anymore. "But where did you get the money?" I finished for her. "I earned it. I built a successful restaurant, won awards, got reviewed in national magazines. I have more money than you ever made from this place." The cruelty in my words was intentional, and I watched them land like physical blows. Father's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You did this to hurt us," he said, his voice thick with accusation. "You bought our restaurant to get revenge." "I bought it because it was for sale and I had the money," I replied calmly. "But you're right about one thing: this is about truth. For 5 years, you've lived with the comfortable lie that disowning me was the right choice. You've told yourselves that you preserved family honor, that you did what was necessary. My mother was crying now, but I continued. You erased me so completely that people in this neighborhood don't even know you had a son. You've been using Nai's memory to market the restaurant while ignoring everything she taught about love and acceptance. We are your parents, my father said desperately. We gave you life. We raised you. You threw me out, I interrupted. You chose your prejudices over your child. You decided that your reputation was more important than your son's happiness. Pulled an envelope from my pocket and set it on the table between us. This is an eviction notice. You have 30 days to remove any remaining personal belongings from the premises. After that, you're no longer welcome here. My mother looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Marcus, please. We made mistakes, but we're still your parents. This restaurant is all we have. You had a son, I said quietly. That was all you needed. But you chose tradition over love, honor over family. You made your choice 5 years ago. My father tried one last appeal to what he must have hoped was remaining filial obligation. Your grandmother would not want this. She would want family to stay together. The mention of my grandmother hit harder than I'd expected, but I steadied myself by touching her jade bracelet on my wrist. Nai loved me exactly as I was. She gave me this bracelet the night you kicked me out, and she made sure I got her recipe book after she died. She understood what family really means. I walked to the door and held it open. The restaurant reopens Friday night. You're permanently banned from the premises. If you try to enter or cause any disruption, I'll have you arrested for trespassing. They left without another word, my mother leaning heavily on my father's arm. Both of them looking like they'd aged a decade in the span of our 15-minute conversation. I locked the door behind them and sat alone in the newly renovated dining room, surrounded by the ghosts of my childhood and the weight of choices that couldn't be undone. The staff meeting on Thursday morning was unlike any I'd ever held. My core team from Harmony sat around the new community table at Chen's garden, while I explained the situation that had led to this moment. So the previous owners were your parents, Maria, my sous chef, said slowly, and they kicked you out for being gay. 5 years ago, I confirmed. They've been banned from the premises permanently. If they show up, you call me immediately. And if I'm not available, you call the police. I pulled out a folder containing photographs of my parents and detailed descriptions. I've also prepared this for the host stand. Everyone needs to know what they look like. The written ban was comprehensive and legally sound. Sarah Kim had helped me draft language that covered not just physical presence, but any attempts to disrupt business, contact staff, or interfere with operations. My parents were now legally prohibited from coming within 50 feet of the property. What if they try to get sympathy from customers? Asked James, my new general manager. Tell some sob story about losing their family business. Let them try, I said. Anyone who knows the full story will understand why boundaries are necessary. And anyone who doesn't know the full story doesn't need to be our customer. The reopening of Chen's garden on Friday night exceeded every expectation. The reservation book was completely full, with a waiting list that stretched 3 weeks out. Food critics, industry professionals, and curious diners all wanted to experience what Marcus Chen had done with the space that had launched his culinary journey. The evening felt like vindication and celebration rolled into one. Every dish that left the kitchen represented not just technical skill, but emotional healing. The soup dumplings filled with duck, confit, and shiitake mushrooms earned applause from a table of food writers. The tea smoked salmon with black garlic. Fried rice had customers asking for the recipe. But the moment that mattered most came when Helen Zhang arrived with a group of my grandmothers, friends from the senior center. I watched from the kitchen as they tasted the menu, their faces lighting up with recognition and approval. Your grandmother would be so proud, Helen told me when I visited their table. This is exactly what she always hoped the restaurant could become. The local food scene responded with overwhelming support. My fellow chefs understood the complexity of family dynamics in restaurant culture. They knew how often tradition and innovation clashed, how frequently family businesses destroyed relationships along with financial security. The first review appeared in the Portland Mercury 3 days after reopening. The new Chen's Garden represents more than just excellent foodites, a masterclass in how to honor heritage while embracing evolution. Chef Marcus Chen has transformed his family's struggling restaurant into something that celebrates both tradition and innovation. But the real test came 2 weeks later, when my parents attempted to violate the ban. They showed up during lunch service, trying to enter through the back alley door that led to the kitchen. James spotted them on the security camera and called me immediately. I arrived to find them standing in the alley, looking defeated and desperate. My mother was holding a small bag that I assumed contained the last of their personal items from the office. "Marcus, please," my father said when he saw me. "We just want to talk. 5 minutes. The ban is permanent," I said firmly. "You need to leave immediately, or I'm calling the police." "We're your parents," my mother pleaded. "Doesn't that mean anything to you?" "You stopped being my parents the night you threw me out," I replied. Parents don't abandon their children. For being gay, parents don't erase their children from family history. Parents don't use their dead mother-in-law's memory to manipulate customers while refusing to acknowledge their own son's existence. They left without another word, and I never saw them again. The success of the new Chen's Garden wasn't just measured in revenue or reviews, though both exceeded projections. It was measured in the community that formed around the restaurateur, LGBTQ+ youth who found acceptance, Asian American families who saw their heritage celebrated rather than hidden, food lovers who experienced the magic that happens when tradition embraces innovation. I'd taken something that represented rejection and transformation it into a symbol of resilience, growth. And the family you choose, when the family you're born into chooses prejudice over love, 6 months after reopening Chen's Garden, stood in the kitchen during prep time, watching my team work with the same passion and precision that had made Harmony successful. The afternoon light streamed through the new skylights I'd installed, illuminating my grandmother's memorial wall and the bustling energy of a restaurant that had found its purpose. David appeared in the doorway, holding an envelope that made my stomach clench with recognition. "This came to the house," he said gently. "It's addressed to you from your parents." I wiped my hands on my apron and took the letter, feeling the weight of paper that might contain an apology, an accusation, or something in between. Instead of opening it immediately, I slipped it into my pocket and continued working that evening. After service ended and the staff had gone home, I sat at the community table with David and finally opened the letter. It was written in my mother's careful handwriting, English slightly formal in the way of someone translating thoughts from another language. "Dear Marcus," it began, "we have been thinking for many months about what to say to you. That sorry is not enough for what we did. We were wrong to choose our fear over our love for you. We were wrong to make you leave. We were wrong to pretend you never existed." The letter continued for 3 pages, acknowledging the pain they'd caused, the years they'd lost, the grandchildren they would never meet. But what struck me most was what wasn't there. No excuses about cultural expectations, no blame placed on outside pressures, no requests for reconciliation. "We know we cannot undo what we did," the letter concluded. "We know you have built a beautiful life without us. We're proud of who you have become, even though we have no right to that pride. We hope someday you can forgive us, not for our sake, but for yours." I set the letter down and looked around the restaurant that had become a symbol of my healing. The space held all the warmth and innovation that Chen's Garden could have been if my parents had chosen love over fear, acceptance over tradition. "What do you think?" David asked. "I think they finally understand what they lost," I said. "But understanding and forgiveness are different things." The truth was that I'd already found peace, not through reconciliation but through transformation. I'd taken the pain of rejection and used it to build something beautiful. I'd honored my grandmother's memory not by preserving her recipes unchanged, but by letting them evolve into something that reflected both heritage and progress. The new Chen's Garden was thriving beyond anything the original restaurant had ever achieved. We'd been featured in Food and Wine's Best Restaurants in America issue. The James Beard Foundation had nominated me for Outstanding Chef. Most importantly, we'd become a gathering place for people who understood what it meant to create family from choice rather than obligation. During our first anniversary celebration, I stood before a dining room filled with chosen family. David's parents, who'd embraced me as another son. My staff, who'd become my closest friends. Customers who'd become part of our community. And Helen Zhang, who'd served as the bridge between my past and present. A year ago, this restaurant was dying, I told the crowd. It was a place where tradition had become a prison, where fear had replaced love, where the past was more important than the future. Tonight, it's a place where heritage and innovation dance together, where everyone is welcome, where food tells stories of resilience and hope. I raised my glass, looking around at faces that reflected every color and background. at couples of every configuration, at families built by choice and love rather than just genetics, to Chen's garden, I said. And to the truth that family isn't about who shares your blood, it's about who chooses to love you exactly as you are. The applause filled the space that had once represented my deepest pain and now embodied my greatest triumph. The knowledge that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well.